My father always told me that the company was built on loyalty and justice. For years, I believed those words shaped the backbone of his empire. I dedicated myself to his business, giving my full energy, my youth, and my trust. But everything shifted the moment my stepmother entered the picture. She didn't just marry my father, she slipped into every corner of his mind, planting doubts about me, feeding him poison dressed as affection. It started with subtle changes. The meetings I used to lead were reassigned. The decisions I once influenced were suddenly taken without me. My father, who had once trusted me with every major call, began questioning even my smallest moves. I tried to brush it off at first, telling myself he was just distracted, but the truth was far sharper. My stepmother whispered into his ear, convincing him I was too ambitious, too eager to take his place, too much of a threat to his control. Then one evening, in the office that had been mine for nearly a decade, he looked at me without hesitation and told me to leave the company. No warning, no explanation beyond the cruel truth, he wanted his wife to be happy. And her happiness meant my absence. I stood frozen, trying to make sense of his words. All I had done was fight for the company, push for its growth, protect its integrity. Yet here I was, cast aside not for failure but for her satisfaction. He didn't fire me as a professional, he dismissed me as a daughter. The weight of betrayal was heavier than any business loss. My father had chosen her over me, the woman he married late in life, who hadn't built an ounce of this empire, who saw me as competition from the very beginning. I walked out that day with no argument, no plea. If he wanted me gone, then I would leave. I refused to beg for what I had already earned with my blood and time. But deep inside, the sting carved a permanent scar. I wasn't just losing my role in the company, I was losing my place in his trust. At first, I tried to distance myself. I stayed quiet, avoided confrontation, told myself he would realize the truth eventually. I poured my energy into small independent projects, anything to distract from the emptiness left by the empire I had been exiled from. But the silence didn't last long. Rumors began circling in the business community. Partners spoke carefully, as though they were testing me for a reaction. Investors I had known for years hinted at irregularities inside the company. When I pressed gently, I learned enough to spark suspicion. Something was wrong. I began to dig. Though I was officially out, I still had people loyal to me, employees who had worked under my leadership for years, who trusted me more than the glossy promises of my stepmother. Quietly, they sent me information. Internal reports. Financial drafts. Snippets that painted a pattern. The numbers didn't lie. My stepmother wasn't just meddling in management, she was draining the company. Hidden under polished accounting tricks, she had siphoned nearly 40% of the company's funds into her own channels. 40%, an astronomical number that couldn't be brushed off as mismanagement or error. It was theft, pure and calculated, carried out while my father smiled beside her, blind to the disaster being stitched under his nose. My anger grew with every page I read. This was the same woman for whom I had been sacrificed, the woman my father defended with blind devotion. She hadn't just undermined me, she had gutted the company he swore to protect. The betrayal struck twice. Once when my father chose her happiness over my loyalty. Twice when he handed her the keys to the empire, only for her to steal nearly half of its bloodline. And what? For the first time, he saw the truth, not through my words, but through undeniable evidence. His wife, the woman he had defended against me, had turned him into a fool. She wasn't protecting his empire. She was bleeding it dry. I didn't gloat. I didn't remind him of his choice to exile me. I simply stood there, calm but unyielding, watching as he faced the consequence of his blindness. He realized too late that justice had always been on my side. The empire he built on loyalty had been betrayed by the one he trusted most, and the daughter he cast aside was the only one who could see clearly. And in that silence, I understood something powerful. His decision to abandon me was the beginning of his downfall, but it would also become the foundation of my return. I didn't rush back into the company demanding control. That would have been too easy for him to dismiss as anger, too simple for her to twist into arrogance. Instead, I chose patience. Strategy. If my stepmother thought she had cornered me, she hadn't realized I still carried something she could never touch: loyalty from the people who truly built the empire. The employees knew me. They remembered who fought for their bonuses, who stayed late to fix crises, who never asked for glory but ensured stability. They had endured her sudden interference, her lavish spending disguised as business growth, her shallow presentations that lacked the substance to impress anyone who actually understood the industry. And quietly, they reached out to me. Not with open rebellion, but with whispers, updates, and support that built my confidence. I began collecting more than just financial proof. I built a full record of her schemes, how she inserted her relatives into cushy positions, how contracts were awarded to her friends' companies at inflated rates, how her consultants drained money while offering no measurable results. Every move was documented, every signature saved. She thought she was untouchable, but arrogance always leaves a trail. Meanwhile, my father crumbled under the weight of truth. He didn't admit it aloud, but I saw it in his eyes whenever we met. The man who once looked at me with suspicion now carried guilt. He had banished me for her happiness, and in return, she betrayed the very values he claimed to honor. Yet pride kept him silent. He couldn't face me with an apology, not yet. He couldn't undo the choice that broke our bond. That was when the opportunity came. One of the major investors, a man who had known me since I was a teenager, reached out. He had heard whispers of my exile, but he never believed I would simply walk away. "We know the truth isn't what they're telling us," he said. "If you're willing, we'll listen to you." It was the opening I needed. I presented the records I had gathered, not just the stolen 40%, but the entire pattern of deceit. The investors didn't just see numbers, they saw betrayal, incompetence, and danger to their money. My stepmother, who had once charmed my father into blind devotion, couldn't charm people whose livelihoods depended on results. She tried to defend herself. She raised her voice, accused me of manipulation, claimed the documents were forged. But the board wasn't swayed by tantrums. They saw the facts. They saw the losses. They saw her for what she was, a thief in designer clothes. And then, the inevitable happened. A vote. One by one, the investors and partners spoke. Confidence in her? Gone. Trust in me? Restored. By the end of that meeting, my father didn't just look defeated, he looked broken. The woman he sacrificed me for had humiliated him publicly, and the daughter he cast aside was the only one capable of saving what remained. She didn't go quietly. She tried threats, emotional manipulation, even lawsuits. But her power came from the illusion of control, and once that illusion cracked, she was powerless. Without the money she siphoned, without my father's blind protection, she was just another outsider who tried to bleed a company dry. My father watched it all unfold. He never said the words I secretly longed for, never admitted that he was wrong, never openly apologized for abandoning me. But his silence was louder than any apology could be. He knew the empire survived because of me, and he knew she was his greatest mistake. I didn't. What mattered more was justice. The empire was no longer tainted by her greed. The employees no longer lived under her reckless hand. The investors no longer feared collapse. And I, the daughter who was told to leave for her happiness, stood at the center of it all, not as a replacement, but as the rightful leader. I had been pushed out, humiliated, replaced. But in the end, it was her greed that exposed the truth, and my strength that rebuilt what she tried to destroy. And when I finally stood in that office again, not as an exile but as the head of the empire, I realized something. My father's betrayal didn't end my story, it made me stronger. His mistake became my foundation. Her theft became my proof. Their downfall became my rise. I wasn't just the daughter anymore. I was the one who restored the name, rebuilt the company, and proved that no betrayal, no matter how deep, could erase the truth. Taking control of the company should have been the end, but it was only the beginning of a harsher war. My stepmother wasn't the kind of woman who disappeared quietly. Stripped of her influence, cut off from her stolen accounts, she lashed out with every weapon she could find. The first attack came through lawyers. She filed lawsuits claiming I had forged documents, manipulated investors, and orchestrated a smear campaign. Her claims were dramatic, filled with lies meant for headlines. She wanted the world to doubt me, to paint me as the schemer and herself as the victim. But lawsuits don't survive without evidence, and she had none. Every accusation collapsed under scrutiny, while my records, painstakingly gathered over months, stood unshakable. Her next attempt was more personal. She tried to exploit the family bond she had destroyed. She appeared at my father's side, speaking loudly enough for me to hear. She's dividing us. She wants to erase me from your life. It might have worked once, but not anymore. My father didn't defend her. He didn't look at me with suspicion. He only sat in silence, his eyes heavy with the weight of choices he couldn't undo. Silence became his curse. The man who once commanded boardrooms now struggled to speak even in his own home. His empire was alive, but his pride was in ruins. Watching him break was almost harder than the betrayal itself. He had chosen her happiness over mine, and in return, she destroyed him. Now all he could do was watch me rebuild what he nearly lost. But I couldn't dwell on his guilt. The company needed more than survival, it needed transformation. Betrayal had taught me a brutal lesson: power without safeguards invites disaster. I began restructuring everything. Transparent audits. Stronger contracts. Independent oversight. No spouse, no relative, no manipulator would ever have the chance to bleed the empire again. Employees felt the shift immediately. Where she ruled with vanity, I led with clarity. Where she wasted money on luxuries, I invested in growth and stability. Morale rose. Productivity surged. Investors who once feared collapse now doubled their commitments. The empire wasn't just recovering, it was evolving. Her allies disappeared. Her lawsuits were dismissed. Her voice grew weaker as her credibility crumbled. By the time the storm ended, she was reduced to nothing more than a scandalous memory, a cautionary tale whispered in business circles about greed and overreach. And my father? He remained silent. He watched from the shadows of boardrooms, from the corners of meetings, from the edge of family dinners that felt more like battlegrounds. His eyes carried regret, but his mouth never formed the words I once yearned to hear: I was wrong. Pride chained him, and perhaps that was punishment enough. I didn't need his apology anymore. His silence was its own confession. Every time he saw me at the head of the table, leading with strength and clarity, he was reminded of the truth: the daughter he abandoned was the one who saved him. I built something stronger than revenge. I built resilience, legacy, and independence. No betrayal could erase what I had become. No manipulation could weaken the foundation I had reforged. I wasn't just the heir to his empire, I was its future. My stepmother's schemes ended in ruins. My father's pride ended in silence. And I, the daughter who was once told to leave for her happiness, stood unshaken at the top, the empire stronger than it had ever been. And deep inside, I knew this: betrayal had pushed me down, but justice had lifted me higher than I ever imagined. Power had returned to my hands, but closure still lingered out of reach. The company was thriving, the employees loyal, the investors reassured, but inside the family, silence hung like a storm that refused to break. My father avoided confrontation. He attended meetings but rarely spoke. He lingered in the background, a man who had lost not just authority but dignity. For months, I waited for him to acknowledge the truth. An apology. A word of recognition. A gesture of reconciliation. But none came. His pride was too deep, his guilt too heavy. He had chosen my stepmother over me, sacrificed me for her happiness, and in the end, she betrayed him in the most public, humiliating way. To admit his mistake would mean admitting he destroyed the bond between us for nothing. But fate has a cruel way of forcing words out of silence. The final chapter began with my stepmother's last desperate move. Ruined financially, rejected by the board, dismissed by the courts, she tried to corner my father one more time. She confronted him at his estate, demanding access to what little remained of his personal wealth. Her voice carried across the hall as I arrived for a scheduled meeting. She accused him of betrayal, of abandoning her after everything she sacrificed. It was almost laughable. Her sacrifice had been nothing but theft. For the first time in years, my father raised his voice. You destroyed everything I built. You made me doubt the one person who stood by me. You made me cast away my daughter. His voice cracked on the last word, but the truth was undeniable. She fought back with venom, hurling insults, threatening to expose more lies to the press. But her power was gone. With no money, no allies, and no credibility, she was just a desperate woman clinging to a crumbling illusion. My father ordered her out of the house, his voice shaking with both rage and regret. She left with curses on her lips, but her shadow no longer held power over us. That was her end, not in triumph, but in disgrace, stripped of everything she thought she had stolen permanently. After she was gone, silence filled the room. My father turned to me, his eyes heavy, his posture broken. For the first time since he exiled me, he spoke directly, without pride to shield him. I destroyed what mattered most, he said quietly. I let her blind me. I betrayed you. The words hit harder than I expected. For years, I had dreamed of hearing them, imagined scenarios where he admitted his mistake. Now that they were spoken, they didn't heal the wound completely, but they closed it enough for me to breathe. I didn't need to gloat or remind him of the pain he caused. The truth itself was punishment enough. I looked at him not as a father, but as a man undone by his own choices. You didn't betray me alone, I told him. You betrayed your company. Your people. Yourself. I was just the one who survived it. He lowered his head, unable to argue. There was no defense left, only resignation. He knew his legacy would no longer be remembered for his rise, but for the betrayal that nearly destroyed it. But I wouldn't let the empire end as a tragedy. In the months that followed, I reshaped everything. The company grew beyond its former glory, not just as a business but as a symbol of resilience. We expanded into new markets, formed alliances built on trust, and implemented systems so transparent that corruption couldn't breathe inside our walls. Every employee knew we had faced collapse and survived because loyalty and truth won over deceit. The investors, once shaken, became our strongest advocates. They didn't just praise the numbers, they praised the leadership. My leadership. The daughter once cast aside had become the shield of the empire, the voice of reason, the proof that betrayal could never extinguish justice. And my father? He faded into the background. He attended meetings less frequently, content to let me lead. His silence was no longer filled with suspicion but with acceptance. He knew the empire was safe in my hands, safer than it had ever been under his. In private moments, he sometimes tried to speak, to bridge the chasm between us. But the years of betrayal couldn't be erased with words. I respected him as the man who built the foundation, but I no longer needed him to define my worth. The real closure came not with his apology, but with my own realization. I didn't rise because he gave me the chance. I rose because he tried to take everything from me, and I refused to break. His betrayal forged my strength. His blindness revealed my clarity. His silence forced me to build a voice that couldn't be ignored. As for my stepmother, she disappeared from the world that once admired her. Occasionally, rumors surfaced, small appearances in distant places, failed attempts to reinvent herself, whispers of debt and scandal. But she no longer mattered. Her story was over. Mine had only begun. I stood at the top of the company one final time, looking out at the people who had stayed loyal, at the empire that had survived betrayal and theft. I didn't just see a business, I saw justice. Proof that truth survives manipulation, that loyalty outlasts greed, that resilience outshines betrayal. And in that moment, I understood, my father's choice to abandon me wasn't my downfall, it was my rebirth. My stepmother's theft wasn't my defeat, it was my evidence. Their betrayal didn't end me, it built me. The final chapter of betrayal had ended, and the era of justice had begun. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read the final decision. Every bribe, every forged signature, every lie they had told was now exposed. My stepmother and her daughter stood frozen, unable to breathe as the truth collapsed their fake empire. I felt no pity. They had taken my father's trust, turned it into greed, and destroyed everything he once stood for. But now, justice had a voice, mine. The lawyer who betrayed me tried to shift the blame, but the evidence was undeniable. His career ended in front of everyone, the same way he thought he had ended my future. We are. I didn't gloat, didn't look back. I only walked forward, free from the shadows of betrayal. My father's secret had saved me, but my strength had finished the war. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read the final decision. Every bribe, every forged signature, every lie they had told was now exposed. My stepmother and her daughter stood frozen, unable to breathe as the truth collapsed their fake empire. I felt no pity. They had taken my father's trust, turned it into greed, and destroyed everything he once stood for. But now, justice had a voice, mine. The lawyer who betrayed me tried to shift the blame, but the evidence was undeniable. His career ended in front of everyone, the same way he thought he had ended my future. We are. I didn't gloat, didn't look back. I only walked forward, free from the shadows of betrayal. My father's secret had saved me, but my strength had finished the war.